All right, guys, today with over 20 years in real estate experience, Lissette and I are going to give you our best negotiation tips.
You better get fired up.
Baby, it's Monday. How you doing, Lissette?
I'm awesome. How are you, Joe?
I am awesome too. You are awesome, man. And what a great day to be awesome. Today, we're going to go over some negotiation tips that we have kind of picked up, not necessarily in a book or a YouTube video or some event that we've gone to, but through our actual experience. We're going to focus on the difference between what does matter and what is going to give you a positive return on your investment, and what some people maybe focus on that might be more of a deal killer than it is a deal maker. So, Lissette, I'm going to let you start it off. Tell us a little bit about some things that you see people typically doing, what works and what doesn't.
So one of the things I always encounter for the most part on a lot of my listing appointments is the seller is like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not fixing anything. I'm not getting any credits, any concessions. It's nothing. And I'm like, well, that's great. But just know a buyer is always going to come at you with something.
Yep.
So even though from right off the start, we say we're not doing any repairs, we're not giving any credits, the buyer is always going to try to get something, whether a credit, whether it's a little patching on the wall, something. So come to it with an open mind. Some of these fixes can be really minor and some of them are bigger. So why not sit down and say, okay, maybe I'm comfortable making these type of fixes and I'm not comfortable making these other kind, and then come into a negotiation already with that preset mind.
I love that. And I'd actually come at this video with, I created a top 10 list. And one of my 10 was, with a lot of these terms, you're either choosing to make more money or you're choosing to get more convenience. And I don't think a lot of people understand that you're choosing between the two. So if I'm a seller and Lisette's my listing agent and I say, hey, I'm not fixing anything, you can say that. And man, is that convenient, right? But what you're missing there is the loss in average sales price that you're going to get. You are not going to sell on average for as much as somebody who says, hey, if it's pretty minor, it's something I can do and it's understandable, of course I'm going to help them with that. That person on average is going to make more money on their sale than the person who is not bending, right? So just be aware. There's not a right or a wrong answer. Convenience is great. Money is great. Just be aware that you're selecting between one of the two when you say something like that. Lissette, what else you got?
So from the buyer standpoint, a lot of times I come across, well, they want to come in super low. They want to come in $10,000, $15,000 lower. But if I'm showing you the comps that maybe these properties are valued a little bit higher and you have a seller that's very stern on their pricing, consider that also if you're coming across into a property that's worth its value. You got to back up the reason why you want to come in $10,000, $15,000 under market, not just because you want to grab a deal.
Yeah, and I think some people, a lot of people, myself, I've got a stepfather who he will not buy anything unless he gets a discount on it, right? Now, that thing could be double the normal price, and he only gets 10% off, so he's still paying way over. But as long as he got that discount, he feels like he got a good deal, right? That thing could be 20% underpriced, and he won't pay full value, or I should say full price. It's undervalued. He won't pay full price because he didn't get a discount off of it. And so I love what you said about backing up your price with actual comps, actual data. I think that's phenomenal. What else you got?
Sometimes I have a buyer that comes across and they see a big list that's on the inspection report. Now, that is to be expected on every property, even new construction. And knowing the difference of what is important and what is not, and what is a major repair and what's needed is really important. And that's when us as agents and also your inspector comes into play and ask them, on this list of items, maybe sometimes we come across the window needs a little bit of fixing, a little bit of adjusting, compared to maybe there could be an issue with the roof. Now, the roof would be something I would be really concerned about. The window, not so much. So really sit down and ask questions and research what are the important items and what are not.
Great conversation to have. And I would add to that, I think expectation management before you even have the inspection is just as important. A lot of newer agents might not tell you that, hey, here's typically what we see on a resale versus new construction. Here's typically what buyers and sellers are going to negotiate on. That conversation is absolutely critical because now going in, at least for me, I tell people, hey, if it's a major issue, like a major plumbing issue, a major electrical issue, a roof issue, an AC issue, those are things that we absolutely want to have a strategy for, whether it's a credit or them taking care of it or whatever. In fact, your lender almost assuredly is going to make that thing okay, right? So a lot of those things have to be fixed, whether the buyer and seller want to fix them or not. But another part of that conversation before they get into the inspection is getting them mentally prepared that a lot of the smaller stuff, hey, welcome to owning a home. You're going to get that regardless. And if you want to pay a little bit more, we can go and get new construction. You won't have any of that. Again, we're talking about convenience versus money. Which do you want? So I love that one as well. What else is on your list, Lizette?
So, another thing to negotiate is if the property does not appraise. Now, that's a biggie. So, if your property doesn't appraise, and let's just say the offer that you have on hand is an FHA buyer, now you have an issue. Do you want to put that property back on the market, or are you willing to negotiate with this buyer? Now, knowing that you have to put that property back on the market and this appraisal is going to follow that listing for what is it, 60, 90 days, I believe it is.
I think it's
Um,
6 months.
6 months, there you
Yeah.
go. So it's going to follow that. So you're going to still encounter the same problem down the line with another buyer,
Yes.
which could potentially be FHA or VA. So consider that instead of just shutting the door and say, nope, I'm not. I'm going to walk, put it back on the market.
That's a point a lot of sellers don't understand, and frankly, a lot of newer agents don't understand is if I've got the listing and it appraises for whatever 500 grand, but our offer was 550, and I say no to that buyer and try to look for a new buyer. If that new buyer is also FHA, that appraisal sticks. You can't get a new appraisal for 6 months, so you have to only look at cash buyers and conventional buyers at that point, right? You've got a challenge in front of you that a lot of people don't understand. So that's a great point as well. Now, I would say that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, bend, take the offer. That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't think, Lizette, you're saying that either. It's just something to take into consideration as part of the overall strategy. What else you got, Lizette?
So sometimes we come across sellers that are very stuck on a certain price as well. And you have to understand if you come and have an offer coming in, maybe two, $3,000 less than what you really wanted, be a little bit flexible. Think of what's going to be the cost of carrying that property for the next couple months. And again, waiting for another offer to come in that could be lower than that. So let's say you're at 350 and you wanted to sell at 350, but you're getting offers at 340. Pay attention to those offers that are coming in. They're all coming in at the same price point for a reason, and be a little bit flexible.
Yeah, and talking a little bit about major pricing strategies, 20, 30 years ago, that 349.9, 499.9, that price structure worked because it worked on this up here, right, psychologically, and it got you a little bit more interested in the property because it was cheaper. At least it felt cheaper, right? Now that matters way less than hitting major price points on search sites like Zillow, Realtor, Trulia, Redfin, whatever. So to be at 500 is way more important than being at 499.9 because now you're hitting all the 5 to 550 buyers as well as the 450 to 5 buyers. Why do I say all that? Because Lizette is saying, hey, be a little bit flexible on your price as a seller, right? So the common comeback to that is, okay, well then let's start $5,000, $10,000 high, and then we can afford to negotiate, right? So am I a big fan of that as an agent? You'll hear both sides, but I'll tell you my personal strategy on that. It depends. If I think your home is worth 550 and you want to list it at 560, I would really be leery of that because 550 is such a major price point. You're going to lose a lot of people that are looking up to 550 or 450 to 550 or 5 to 550. They're all gone. You've lost all of them. That's a lot of loss to hopefully be able to grab somebody's attention, even though you're 10 grand overpriced, and get a deal done, right? So I would really encourage you to be at 550 there. However, if I tell you your property's worth 540 and you want to go to 550 for that exact reason, I'd say, hey, it's not nearly as big a deal. Anybody looking 5 to 550 is still going to see your property. Anybody looking 450 to 550 is still going to see your property. You are losing out, or I'm sorry, you wouldn't be in that case. In that case, you would be gaining all the people looking from 550 to 6 or 550 to 650. So there will be a workable strategy. So I want to throw that out there because that's a common comeback that I hear from people. Lizette, you got anything else on that list?
So on the buyer side, again, just hitting back to the inspection period, sometimes we do have that list in front of you and it could be a little bit overwhelming, but also remember, what is your motivation? Does this property check off all the boxes that you're looking for? And is it worth walking if the seller is not being very cooperative with you? Is it
Yes.
worth just taking a list of that and seeing how much is that going to cost you once you move into the property? If it fits the location, if it fits your insurance needs, if it fits what you're looking for and your time frame, it may be worth to bend a little bit on some of those items and looking at the bigger
Yep.
picture.
Yeah, and guys, I'm going to go through my list here of top 10, which I think, Lizette, you've probably touched on half of them already. But I see we got a lot of people watching. If you've got some questions about negotiations or your favorite tips, feel free to put them in the comments and we'll talk about them before the end of this. But number one, the more emotion you can take out of a deal and the less you can make it a logical decision, the better you're going to be all the time. People get emotional, and you know if you're emotional or not, right? I can go through a process, and it's probably because of real estate, and I don't really get emotional about anything. I'm very able to make very logical decisions, even if I'm getting frustrated, even if I'm overly excited. I can make pretty logical decisions. Some people can't do that. You've got to really be aware of yourself, and if you can't do that, you need to lean on your spouse. You need to lean on your agent. You need to lean on people who can make logical decisions, because 99% of the time it's going to pay dividends for you, right? I see people get into a bind when they start making emotional decisions. I love this one. It's always good to discuss out loud where your breaking point is, even if it's only with yourself, before that offer or counter offer comes in. So if Lizette and I are going back and forth, one of us has the buyer, well, let's say I got the buyer and you got the seller, and your house is at 500 and we come in at 480. When I present that offer to you at 480, while you're talking to your seller about that, I'm already talking to my buyer saying, let's talk about what you will do logically before that offer comes back, right? That way we're not making emotional decisions. We're making logical decisions. If they come back at 480, obviously you're going to get it. What if they come back at 490? What about 485? What about 495? What about full price at 500? What would you do? And would you be willing to lose the house at that price? Would you be willing to up your mortgage every single month if you had to go higher? Whatever it is you say there, let's try to stick to that, because that was what logical, non-emotional, or at least less emotional you said that you wanted to do, right? Third one, never be a deal breaker, right? I always try to look for ways to create some sort of love for the other side. If it's price that's the issue, but closing date isn't a big deal to us, or I know you love our dining room set and we don't really care about that dining room set, there's ways to love you up and really keep that deal alive and make it look like we're being givers, not takers. And that's going to create an immense amount of rapport for the other side as well, right? Number four, stay positive. Negativity rarely outdoes positivity. I can't imagine a lot of people are going to disagree with that. Number five, this is a big one. You're never, you have nothing to risk. I shouldn't say nothing, but very little. And I'll tell you what it is. You have very little to risk when negotiating during an inspection as a buyer. Would you agree with that, Lizette?
I would.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you have the property, but
Yeah,
you might lose
well, but
out.
what I'm saying is, okay, so let's say I'm the buyer, you're the seller, right? And it's a $500,000 property, and pick your issue. It doesn't matter what it is. I can ask you for a $5,000 credit, a $10,000 credit. I can ask for a date change. I can ask you to pay more of my clothes. I can ask for anything I want. But if I'm thinking I'm going to move ahead no matter what, this is my house, I'm buying it. Remember, you're the buyer, you're in control. That seller, 99% of the time, has no contingencies allowing them out of that deal. There are some that do, but it's pretty rare. It is your house, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, unless you give it up. So if you go ask for $5,000, you risk nothing, very little. We'll talk about it in a second, because the worst thing they'll say is no. And you can say, okay, we're still moving forward. You are in full control, right? So don't forget that. So what do you lose? Well, you better hope nothing happens if you upset the other side too much between when you try to negotiate from inspection and closing. Because if something pops up and you guys have a great relationship, odds are you're going to put that thing together. You're going to figure out a solution, move forward. If you've already been contentious or they feel you've tried to take advantage of them, that was your one political go, right? You used it up already. You might not get it when you need a new closing date or something. So that's what you do have to risk. Be aware of that. Number six, increase your escrow deposit. A lot of people, a lot of agents think that a $50,000 escrow deposit is way stronger than a $5,000 escrow deposit. Well, guess what? As long as you've got contingencies in your deal, you are protected in a lot of different cases. Now, with every deal, you're going to want to talk with your agent about how protected you are and what that means. But in a lot of cases, you are fully protected. So if that's what the other side likes and you've got the ability to put it up, put it up. It makes you look way stronger, and your risk is almost zero in most cases, right? Again, talk to your agent, but that's another one. I highly advise, and Lizette, I bet you'll agree with me here, I highly advise against verbal offers or counter offers. right?
Hate verbal offers.
I know, and I'm gonna tell you why. It's me and Lissette, right? We're the agents. My buyer says, "Hey, tell Lissette final offer. I'll do 490. Will her buyer or will her seller take it?" She goes back to the seller, and seller says, "Sounds good." Now my buyer says, "Okay, fill out the offer. Here's the closing date. Here's the personal property. Here's blah 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 blah." Seller gets it and says, "Whoa, I agreed to 490. I didn't agree to leaving my couch. I didn't agree to this closing date. I didn't agree to me paying title. I didn't agree to whatever." And all of a sudden, you've got a lack of trust. And it's not because necessarily bad intentions in the buyer's end. It's because all you talked about was price. And with most negotiations that are verbal, all those people talk about is price because they think, hey, price is all that matters. It's not. In most cases, it's the most important thing, but it's not all that's included. Another thing that's even worse is that buyer, my buyer who came in at 490, gets it in verbally. Lisette's seller says yes verbally. And all of a sudden, my buyer says, we changed our mind. We're at 487.5. Or, you know what? We changed our mind. We'll do it, but we want to move our stuff into the house a week early or whatever it is. You change your mind this much after you've got a verbally accepted agreement, and your offer is going nowhere. It's going to die right there on the spot because people get upset, right? So you've got to realize with verbal offers, you've got a lot to lose, and all you're gaining is a little bit of time and convenience. That's for the agents. Agents, write it up, put it in writing, because yes, it is going to take you an extra 7 minutes to write up that addendum. But man, is it going to save a lot of heartache. And I promise you over a career, it'll save you several deals, right? Last one I'm going to go over. With credits, always get 2 or 3 quotes, right? I had one just a week or two ago where it was a 15-year-old AC, and they knew it was a 15-year-old AC. I had the seller. They came in, and then after inspection, they tried to negotiate, and they wanted 10 grand off for the AC. I said, 10 grand? That's interesting. Let me get 2 or 3 quotes. We got a couple quotes, and we got someone who would do it for $6,200 installed. So now we're not negotiating 10 grand. We're negotiating 6,200. At the end of the day, I get them down to a little bit less than half of that, 3 grand. And the only way I was able to get the buyer on board with that was by showing them actual numbers, right? So if you go and get some quotes, whether it's the buyer, the seller, whatever, it's going to help you immensely. Lissette, any last nuggets of information for these guys?
I think it's really important, and a fundamental part in negotiation is having 2 good agents on either side of the transaction. 2 agents that are willing to communicate, and not just communicate, but also express why the seller or buyer feels so strongly about a certain item. Why is the seller not willing to come down? Is there a hardship? Is just the numbers just don't work out for the seller? Express that, and we could come back to our buyer and explain that to them, so they just don't think this is a seller that's not willing to work with them. Is the buyer tight on funds? They can't come in and start repairing stuff and getting things fixed. That's why they need these items addressed. So again, communication, great agents can fix most of these problems.
You can be more right. And I've had situations where you've got great rapport with that other agent, and you can say, hey, I've got some rough news, but I think I got some solutions. The rough news is I can't get them to budge on price, but let me ask you a little bit about some of the other areas of your offer. Talk to me about your closing date. Oh, well, they really want this because they got this and this, and it's a really big deal to them. Okay. My people are flexible on closing date. If we can move it out 3 weeks, so they got a total of 7 weeks instead of 4, it sounds like that would be pretty attractive to your buyers. What else can we do that maybe wouldn't be such a big deal for our side, but it would really help your side? That's not the closing date and not the price, because we've already talked about those 2 things. If I've got a good relationship with that other side, we can make that happen, right? So then as a buyer or seller, you're saying, okay, well, how do I reverse engineer that? Find someone that's very likable and isn't overly emotional, right? Someone that can build a good relationship with you, and they don't get really erratic in certain high stress situations. If they're not erratic in high stress situations with you, they probably aren't with the other agent. If they're very friendly and build a relationship with you, they're probably the same way with the other agent, right? So that's how you as a buyer or seller can take advantage of that and take control. Guys, if you've got any other questions, or if you have great negotiation tactics that have worked for you, feel free to put them in the comments. If you've got ideas for future videos, we're always open to suggestions in the comments. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us. And Lissette, I appreciate your time.